Buenas tardes, friends. Since this is the final presentation for the Renesan Spring, I hope it has been an enriching and pleasant semester for all of you. I thank you for being here today, and I thank the staff and the Renesan Board and Program Committee for inviting me. Could we start with a little thought experiment? Imagine you just bought, paid for in full, a large screen television. Oh, it's a grand thing. We can't wait to watch the Super Bowl or the World Series, maybe next year. You bought that set, yet you don't have that big screen in your media room. The dealer has kept your new set somewhere in the back room of the store and will only let you watch your TV under certain conditions. It's probably in the store, or so you believe, but to watch anything, you must submit a written request to come into the showroom, and only at a time convenient to the store and its employees, or wait until the dealer summons you saying, "Your TV is turned on now." Sometimes the dealer keeps your TV and its inherent information about public events, crime, news, restaurants, or mattress sales in the back room. Sometimes you might be able to hear the programming, but if you want to see it, you must buy a large mirror and prop it up in a doorway at just the right angle to see the screen. Even so, you're not allowed to bring a camera and record the shows and the ads. Such is the situation with the people's data. Citizens have paid governments to collect, maintain, and administer truckloads of data, mountains of data, which, just like your TV in the warehouse, you know the data is there, but you can't see it or you can't use it. For centuries, taxpayers have paid government at all levels to collect data about health, education, contracts, traffic flow, police and fire, applications and permits, budgets and expenditures. More recently, COVID testing, vaccination registration, and where we were or are in the queue for shots. Most of this data, which I assume to be roughly 85%, has little to do with the individual's privacy or public security. Those governments generally, like our TV dealer, keep the people's data somewhere behind the counter, stored in dusty boxes with few labels describing the contents. That data could be used to drive informed decisions about voting for candidates or bond issues or health care, economic growth, public safety, or potential improvements to the quality of life. It will drive all those decisions if only we could have access to the data to analyze it. So what is or are the people's data? Why should we care, and why can't we get it? I think we can all agree that we pay taxes to governments at all levels, local, state, and national. And we also can agree that our governments collect and save data, starting with knowing whether we as individuals have paid those taxes or not. This is hardly a new concept. In Babylon, records were kept in a cuneiform script on clay tablets. The Inca Empire kept records with a system of knots in strings called quipu. In the Middle Ages and onward, the kings and popes, mayors and priests tracked births, marriages, and deaths. In the case of the United States, the federal government has been harvesting data since the early colonial period. The call for data collecting shows up high in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 3, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, followed by a call for an actual enumeration, that is, a census. The census, a topic and data set that has been debated since literally the beginning of our nation. To this day, I think it could be argued that the census data may be the largest public data set in the government. Our census data is used 24/7 by every government agency, every business or intended business, by thousands of residents tracking their family trees. Am I allowed to profess love for a data set? If so, make my Valentine for the Census Bureau data a public declaration. I also suggest that when we pay our due to the governments, there's an implied contract between taxpayers and the government. That is, items that a court will or should assume are intended to be included in a contract even if they are not expressly stated. We visit our doctor and there is an implied contract that she or he will try to fix, repair, or improve whatever's ailing with us. I suggest that when we pay our taxes, there is an implied contract that the governments will use that money to collect, maintain, and administer data collected for the betterment of the community. And therefore, the community has a right and the responsibility to have access to that data and how it was administered so we can see the results of the efforts of our public administrators. At least I believe that, although I don't think my view of implied contract regarding data has ever been directly tested in court. So with this perspective, if it truly is the people's data, the questions become, who benefits from having access to the people's data? Why do we want or need that data? How do we get it? What needs to be done to make it useful? Also, what are the barriers to getting the people's data? Are there success stories? We shall see. So with that possibly overlong prologue, where are we going today? First, let me emphasize that open data is not the same as transparency, that favorite word of contemporary political candidates. There is a classic and a very important difference between transparency and open data. The difference is between just looking through the glass display case and seeing a wonderful piece of jewelry, say a grand Navajo pawn bracelet, versus actually having the clerk give it to you, to hold in your hand, to touch it, to heft it, to trying on that wonderful piece of Navajo craftsmanship, to analyze its weight, to closely examine the mineral currents weaving through the polished turquoise. One version is transparency. The second is the equivalent of open data. By definition, open data is a concept, philosophy, and process that, I shall argue, is the bedrock for moving the El Dorado ideal of it's the people's data from theory to practice. Then we're on to the history of open data, which is only about 12 years old, and a short discussion of the various types of open data. Open data is being applied in many disciplines, professions, and institutions, not just government. Why? Because it has significant to high utility and value for many, even most processes in any organizational activity, especially when it comes to analysis and decision making. Finally, I hope to answer the question, why should citizens care about this stuff? After the intermission, I will drill a little deeper into the needs of citizens, individual citizens, citizens as commercial enterprises, citizens as community organizations. They all benefit from data they have all paid for. Then we'll consider the types of data governments harvest and hold, and why that can and cannot work to the advantages of citizens. As you may have surmised, government, or more specifically people working in government, are not always on the side of taxpayers when it comes to making our data easily available. We call them data huggers. Government employees who unintentionally and intentionally limit our access to the people's data. What is the status today of getting access to our data? It's a roll-a-bolo board. Some days are quite good and we get what we need. Some days are terrible. But I will cover in a couple quick hits some of the resources you can use to haul that data out of government vaults. All of this, however, raises inevitable questions. What are the major and I think unavoidable issues we in our nation must confront in terms of data accuracy, data preservation, and data privacy? That leaves us with the questions, what should people do? What must we do? All of these aspects live under the big tent of the people's data and more precisely, open data. One way to get our arms and minds around the idea of it's the people's data is to think of it in terms of the philosophy of open data. That philosophy includes goals for implementation of open data, which in turn engender goals and policies to transform philosophy into action. It follows that action is the firing pin for the administrative motion of data collection, verification and presentation, and access. Access ideally by the public. Allow me to emphasize, open data is a philosophy, one that should become integral to our American culture of governance. It is a philosophy tied to the practice of requiring that as much data as ethically possible is freely available to everyone. There are no restrictions from copyrights, patents, or other mechanisms of control. Particularly, this includes our data maintained by non-governmental contractors. Briefly stated as a memory frame, we can use the acronym FAIR, F-A-I-R, starting with easy to find the data in its original native file format. I would also make this F squared and add free to that first factor so it becomes findable and free. After all, we have already paid for it, just like we paid for our streets, snow clearance, and enforcement of zoning and building codes. Once the data is found, it needs to be accessible. That is, the data and what's called metadata can be downloaded for analysis. Next, the digital data is interoperable. That is, it can be integrated with other data for storage and analysis using applications like content analysis, spreadsheets, and tools of financial auditing or GIS mapping, and even social network analysis. In a practical manner, that means no more damnable PDF files. So there. More about PDFs later. I think of them just like the 19th century ranchers thought about barbed wire and fencing and farmers. Finally, the data is reusable. It should be well described so it can be replicated and used in different settings. For example, a data set of addresses of evictions can be used to make a map or generate visual statistics. But in all cases, there should be appropriate attribution of the data and its source approach, perhaps by adopting the Creative Commons approach. This open data perspective is not limited to government. We find it being applied in disciplines including law, public and private health, and corporations and NGOs. A pattern that has emerged related to the successful implementation of open data is that it has to have champions from the top down. That is, it must have a strong paladin on horseback in the mayor's office or in the governor's office for government employees to take the open data concept seriously. Without that strong and consistent support, open data is dead on arrival. Once in a while, the stars align. Such was the case in 2012 when Boston's Mayor Martin Walsh and New York's Michael Bloomberg climbed on the open data train and had their staff collaborate on an open data policy and standards statement. In 2012, the law signed by Bloomberg mandated that the city's agencies share all their data on a public portal by 2018. The policy was under the new name Open Data for All. The result in usage by citizens was sometimes surprising. For example, one of the most visited websites in New York City is its illustrated census of all the trees in all the boroughs. New Yorkers can literally drill down into the tree census to find information about their pet arbol. And they do. Santa Fe has an opportunity to start something similar. Last month, the city announced a planting project, a tree planting project. We have suggested that this is an opportunity to issue a birth certificate whenever a tree is planted, map those locations, and make all that information easily available to the community. Benefits? In addition to the obvious, concerned citizens can also be recruited as volunteer urban foresters who might water the trees and report a tree's condition on a regular basis. So how are other cities using open data? A number of cities and towns literally around the world, communities of all sizes, have been implementing open data for at least 6 or 7 years. Here are some examples. Brompton, Canada is a Toronto suburb with about 600,000 people.
The City of Brampton shares their open data on the Brampton GeoHub, a portal where everyone can discover, analyze, and download city data. This data is being collected and used throughout city departments to help in decision-making processes and to improve on services delivered to citizens. The city collects data on things like what's being developed in local neighborhoods, what roads are closed due to construction projects, park amenities, real-time transit locations and alerts, as well as many other interesting data sets. By making this data available to more than just city staff, everyone gets an opportunity to use the data however they would like. Teachers can incorporate the tools and data found on the GeoHub into their lessons. Students are able to incorporate open data and visualization tools into their assignments, reports, and presentations to help connect them to local initiatives and causes. Business owners and entrepreneurs can take advantage of the demographic and business data to help them decide on the best location to expand their company. Land developers can download and analyze property information, planning application data, and building permits from across the entire city. Visualizing this data is key to understanding the opportunities that are available for continued development. The City of Brampton makes it easier for everyone to use open data by building web applications with it and using data to tell the city's stories. We take part in hackathons and educate attendees on how to build solutions and solve problems using publicly available data. We have also built the City Dashboard, a central location that allows everyone to track and monitor the city's service performance. This ongoing commitment to transparency and engagement with the public is absolutely key to Brampton's success as a future-ready smart city. We want to hear from you. What data would you like to see be made available by the City of Brampton? Send your feedback to open@brampton.ca or visit www.geohub.ca to learn more about how you can discover and use Brampton's open data.
The open data philosophy can also work for smaller communities like Johns Creek, Georgia, which is about the same size as Santa Fe, population of about 85,000.
Here at Johns Creek City Hall, we believe city data should be free and easy to access. The Data Hub is an open data portal that contains all the information that is freely accessible to the public. It's designed to make it easy for anyone to access information and learn more about the work that City Hall is doing every day. We designed the site with a top-down approach. You can find the most commonly used tools towards the top of the main page, and the more technical, less frequently accessed tools closer to the bottom. The search bar at the top is a good starting point if you know what you're looking for. If you don't know the exact keywords, you can still pull up maps, dashboards, events, documents, and other data sources related to your search. Initiatives are big goals set by the Mayor and City Council, and they revolve around the Johns Creek Comprehensive Plan, adopted in 2018. Since these goals often involve a number of different city departments, each initiative has its own webpage. Dashboards organize information through charts and maps that are interactive. The goal of using dashboards is to make information easier to digest through visuals. Dashboards also highlight individual departments or teams. Say, for example, you want to compare fire department activities. You can open up the fire department dashboard and look up information, like how call volume and response times vary between stations. Learning videos show you how to do specific tasks with the information you find on Data Hub. Tasks include seeking out new restaurants, locating potential customers through local hotspots, and finding the right spot to launch a new business. The Map Gallery is an interactive tool that can help you find printable maps. If you need maps for capital improvement projects, voting precincts, or the annual Founders Day Parade, you can find them here. Keeping our data up to date and making it accessible through the Data Hub is one of the most valuable things we can offer to our residents. We encourage anyone who hasn't already accessed this tool to use it and get a better sense of what is happening in the Johns Creek community.
But what about open data for Santa Fe? Let's see. Transparency in Santa Fe? Let's check it out. Why, yes. There in the lower right corner is a nice exploding star of transparency. A little light beckons, we can click on it. Okay, we could poke around in the Sunshine Review, but let's just try some ground truthing. We can run a little search to see who applied for or received building permits and when. We get to multiple pages related to building permits, but the majority of those seem to describe how to apply for building permits. Important, valuable, yes. But I searched for approved building permits without any luck. Not finding them, I drilled a little deeper, but without success. Finally, I tried the direct contact approach with an email to the permit. Very quickly, I received a reply. Hey, pal, go to the city attorney and file an IPRA and consider the buck passed. Again, the classic difference between transparency and open data. The difference between just looking through the glass display case versus actually touching, hefting that wonderful piece of Navajo silver to analyze its weight and to closely examine the craftsmanship. But there are alternatives if a city embraces open data and works to build that culture of data delivery and service. An encouraging example can be found in New York City. Here are just a couple examples of what could be done. Not only does there seem to be a lot of activity going on, a lot of projects, but note when this data was collected. On the Ides of March, I captured this image. Any specifics with the dots on this map? You can probably guess. We can find all kinds of useful data related to the city's economics, locations, forthcoming types of structure, and size. I certainly hope we never see a 98-story building built of adobes and vigas in Santa Fe. Is this potentially helpful to people's data? I would suggest yes. And how did it get there? It was at least partially because of a data cultural perspective in the Big Apple. New York City is taking this open data thing seriously. Seriously as something for New Yorkers, not just the people who are city employees. How seriously? How about a public campaign hyping Open Data Week? Nice, but what do the city's open data pages look like? Yes, New York City is a big city with a big budget, but it is also a quite complex city with many demands on its revenues, and the data and services offered are always scalable. Similar things could be started in smaller cities like Santa Fe, but at a lower level of complexity if an encouraging perspective exists. Here we see data right at the top of the page. New sets suggest that things are being updated. Clicking on the most recent published shows just that. I captured this on a Saturday afternoon, March 13th, the day after it was posted, and it already had 19 views. This approach is hardly an American-centric activity. A wonderful international example is the case of Venice, Italy. A friend of mine who is originally from Venice but teaches at Worcester Polytech in Massachusetts has had his students collecting data about Venice for nearly 30 years. That city's economy, as you probably know, is today built on tourism. A few years ago, the students built this real-time dashboard that shows what is happening on any given day at any given time. Who's here today? Tourist arrivals, and we see Airbnb's capacity and occupancy. Yeah, we got that. And now the city can use this data to audit and project some lodging tax revenues. Incoming flights, you bet, down there at the bottom. And here is perhaps one of the most valuable data sets of all, complaints. Imagine if our Santa Fe tourism office had this. What else might we discover besides the fact that there aren't any public toilets around the plaza? So all in all, good on Venice, and we can find similar examples in other international cities. We're headed toward our first Q&A session, so I will try to review the major points thus far. I've argued that there is a vast difference between transparency and open data, a distinction we taxpayers should want to pay attention to. I have argued that many times governments are too quick to be seduced by vendors' sales pitches. In doing so, there is often a loss of control and even knowledge about what goes on under the digital hood. In the end, taxpayers literally pay the price in many ways. And I have at least suggested that as the information environment has and it is changing at a rapid pace, there needs to be a change in the culture of government if data-driven decision-making is to survive with a well-informed electorate. Okay, that's a wrap for the first session. Let's do a handoff to the Masters of Ceremonies in the control tower to bring us down on the Q&A runway. Gentlemen, do we have questions submitted from our audience?